I would just like to welcome you all to our, I believe this is the fourth panel of the day. My goodness. Never even realized how quickly the time has flown. So I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, to Dr. Weldon for joining me. I'm very excited to have her. So Dr. Weldon, she's been here with me, I would say, through my whole journey, really, into this whole science field, and especially like looking at the genetics side of everything. So I will dive more into that later. But Dr. Weldon is my mentor. She's been my inspiration as one of the one Black woman in science that I saw when I was growing up, and I was interested in all of these things. I was like, I wonder who's working on this and how far we can go. And then Dr. Weldon appeared with, with her Bermuda College talk that my mom and my aunt Joan Dillis Wright, she's currently the president of the Senate, they dragged me to this. They were like, you must meet her. You absolutely must get up there. You must speak with her. And it's just absolutely changed my life ever since. So just knowing Dr. Weldon, I'd like to say thank you to her also for wearing the shirt. Quick little plug. If you are a Bermudian student between the ages of 10 to 17, we have a shirt for you. So if you register and you attend about 4 of the workshops, then you'll be ready to get a shirt. We also have a little Arduino Uno for you because I remember how pivotal it was for me when I was learning about robotics. So these things are amazing. It also connects to the Wi-Fi. This is the newest one. A cute little bag for you to have. And when I find it, the $100 Digicel gift card. It's just waiting to put your name on there. So that'll be ready for you as well. So Bermudian students between the ages of 17, well, 10 to 17, you can register for the LinkUp, and we'll be drawing out names later to see whose it will be. Okay. Well, I think a couple of people have joined now. I'm just gonna hop right into the session. So thank you all for joining me. Welcome to the Generational Knowledge is Power webinar. So this one it's sponsored by Carika Genetics. They are one of our gold sponsors for the LinkUp. And the whole purpose of the panel is really to talk about genes, looking at like how, like what we're made of and what we know about that. And then especially in the Caribbean, which is what Carika Genetics is focused on, because nobody talks about us. We're quite a diverse, I guess like a little melting pot here, especially in Bermuda. There's different cultures and people coming from, but nobody's looking at, I guess, what makes us up. That's our genes. So Dr. Weldon is going to be speaking about that, but I'd like to do a quick segue to just say, I'm amazed by the Black excellence we have in the room. Dr. Weldon is the first woman to solely own a genomics company in the whole world, and we have her here today. That is very exciting. We had a previous panel that was the Ethics and Bias in AI panel. That was an all Black panel as well. So we've just been having a lot of Black excellence today, and I am very much enjoying it. So Dr. Weldon, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm excited to learn from you.
I'm just elated to be here. I remember that day when I gave that talk at Bermuda College, and most of the people in the room were my family. It was my first talk that I gave as Dr. Weldon after I graduated. And yeah, I was just like, okay, well, at least there were a few people that weren't obligated to be there. And, when I say, or when people say quality is more important than quantity, like that, it really hit home for me that day, because I met you and we have been on this journey, and it's been amazing to see your growth, and I'm just excited to be here today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So I think I haven't really introduced you very well. So I'm going to get you to introduce yourself and then also speak a little bit more about what Carika Genetics is so that people can understand it.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Carika Weldon. I am a Bermudian biochemist and geneticist. I did all of my training in the UK. My initial plan, and I'll get into this a little bit later on, but my initial plan was to become a medical doctor. Didn't quite work out the way I planned to, but I still, ended up being a doctor at the age I was setting out to be. But I did all my university degrees in Leicester. I did, after that, went straight into lecturing. So I skipped a postdoc, if you're familiar with that kind of trajectory. Usually when you do research, you do a PhD, you do a postdoc for like 5 to 10 years, and then you own your own lab, or not own, you run your own lab. I skipped that part in the middle. So I went straight to having my own lab, and I was in De Montfort University as a lecturer teaching biomedical and medical science. And then I wanted to go back into full-time research, and I ended up at the University of Oxford, which was where I really wanted to be for my schooling. I didn't get in, so we'll get into that later. So like a full circle moment. And I thought that was going to be it for me. I thought, like, I've reached my pinnacle career point. I'm a research scientist at the University of Oxford. Well, that's not what happened. So COVID came, and I believe currently I might still be the only Bermudian with a PhD in RNA science. And so I got called back by the government to Bermuda to set up the COVID testing lab for them and to run it and to run testing for Bermuda. And I was chucked into being the science advisor for the government for COVID. So that now I had to like be on press conferences and explain to the country what was going on. I was like, oh. So yeah, that was a real big diversion in my career. But what it did, it showed me just the breadth of what we were dealing with in Bermuda, but also in the wider Caribbean. And I always wanted to bring genetic research back. As you know, we talked about that when I was still living away. But that experience made me want to shift to actually tackle the Caribbean. So hence Carry Genetics, which is short for Caribbean Genetics. And we are focused on including Caribbean genetics in the global data sets. When pharma companies are designing drugs, we want to make sure that we're involved and that we are gatekeeping our data and we own it because we are very valuable as well. So, yeah.
Amazing. And we're definitely going to be diving more into Kari genetics later in the panel or webinar, really. But I wanted to dive back into you. So you already kind of touched on it a little bit with how you wanted to be a doctor, and then that didn't quite work out. So you had applied to some medical schools and didn't quite get in. So if we could talk more about what happened there and then how you were able to pivot into the biomedical science that you do now.
Yeah, so oh my God, I remember. So my dream was to go to Oxford to do medicine. That was the dream, and become a pediatrician. So that was the initial plan. And I was in my last year of high school, and applying for scholarships and applying for university. And I really wanted to go to the UK. And it felt like divine alignment, I suppose, because the year before I went to university, the UK government changed the law that if you were from an overseas territory, you paid home fees. So that was a big change, right? I know right now, if you look at what home fees are paying, it's still a lot. But back then it was like £3,000 for tuition. And compared to like people that were going to the US and the UK from Bermuda, that was, and they'll be like 20, 25,000. So it was like a big difference. So it was like, this is where I'm supposed to go. And I remember my parents were actually trying to push me more to go to North America. And I was like, see, now it's cheaper for me to go. So that felt like a real big, sign to go that way. And so yeah, I applied, for the UK, you applied to UCAS. So it's a central application process, and you can apply to 5 different universities with the same application. And for medicine, though, you can only use 4 of your spots for medicine. The 5th one has to be a non-medical degree as a backup. So I, was very confident. I was top of my class. I was doing the IB. I was predicted to get 44 out of 45. So it was like, yeah, I'm gonna get in. Yeah. And so applied, and for medicine, actually, it's the same day every year that you have to apply. So it's October 15th. You have to have that UCAS application in, and it gets a lot earlier than everyone else because it's very competitive. And yeah, I heard back, I want to say end of October to middle of November. It wasn't long. It was like a few weeks later that I didn't get into Oxford. And I just felt like my whole life was ending. I remember going to, at the time, the head of sixth form at Work Academy where I was, and I just went into her office and like bawled my eyes out. I know this may sound dramatic, but this was exactly what it looked like in movies where, people like falling down and like the melting and crying. That's exactly what I was doing. I just felt like it was all over at that point. Like, what am I doing? And so I remember Miss McCorkle was this head of sixth form at the time, and she brought out this big book like from this shelf. So no, yeah, it was the biggest book I ever seen still to this day. And she opened it. It was like all the universities like in the world, I'm pretty sure, like in this book. And she like turned and turned and she like pointed to, she's like, you should apply here. And I was like, okay. And that happened to be University of Leicester, right? And that's where I ended up going. So yeah, it was an interesting time because it was the beginning of the school year. Like I had to still do my work. Like it was like it wasn't like I could just like cry for the rest of my life. So I had to pick myself up. I ended up getting, I want to say 39 points in IB, which I think for Work Academy was like joint highest. And um I had applied to three other medical schools as well, and they came back a bit later, but all of them were still no. But I had gotten in at Leicester. So the other person in my year who I was like neck and neck with, her name was Erin Vickers, and she had already applied to Leicester for law and gotten in. So Miss McCorkle said, look, you apply there, you'll get in, at least you'll have a backup. So I got in for medical biochemistry. So at least felt a bit better, right? I had a backup plan. I got in Canada and all of my applications, including McGill. I got in at Penn, University of Penn in the US. Because my mom made me apply to like everywhere. I had like 12 university applications. But it ended up being that I only got in, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. It ended up being where I only got in the UK in Leicester, and I really wanted to go to the UK. I did not want to go to Canada. My pediatrician had went to McGill and was like, "You should go." I was like, "I don't want to be there." So that's what I ended up doing. So it felt like a diversion. The plan was to go back and do medicine after the degree, and it ended up being that there was a way to actually transfer over from the degree I was doing, because actually the first year of the medical degree and my degree were the same. So it's like, oh, perfect. So you had to do like a test called the UK CAT. It's an aptitude test if you want to apply for medicine in the UK. When you're in Bermuda, you're exempt from it, but because I was living in England now, I wasn't exempt. And it just so happened my cousin, who was on the same course as me, also wanted to do the same thing. So we both went to New York during the summer after the first year and applied and tried to transfer. And long story short, it ended up being that it was like I never took the test. It just, for what it was a error with the machine, for whatever reason, I didn't have a result. And so I ended up getting an exemption. And then I found out that in order to get an interview, you needed 30 points, and I got in 29. And I was just like, what if like I had gotten my score and that would have pushed me over the edge? And I was like, oh. So yeah, I then kind of was not sure what I was gonna do because I was like, hey, I tried medicine twice and it didn't work. And then I ended up getting some advice from my not my PhD, my third year project supervisor, because in the UK it's only a 3-year degree and you do like a research project. His wife was also a scientist, and she was like, well, why don't you like get a scholarship from Bermuda and do your PhD here? I was like, that's a great idea. So I shifted from, wanting to do medicine to going in the research route, and I haven't looked back since. I'm actually glad I ended up this way, because I don't think medicine was for me anyway. I prefer to be on the exploration side of things. And again, look, being the first Black woman to found a genomics company, didn't know I was going to do that, but I feel like this is my lane, and I'm just really excited. So the moral there is, it felt like a diversion, but it was actually where I needed to get to, and it felt like I had failed, getting into, everyone expected me to get in, and I didn't. And I felt like, oh, I've just let everyone down. But that wasn't the case at all. It was just a different plan than what I had come up with myself. So yeah.
Well, I don't know how we can ask any questions after that, but I will be following up. So I wanted to ask, just in interest of time, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to when you came back home. So I remember, if
Yeah.
I'm not wrong, when you were at the Montfort for your PhD, you were a lecturer there as well. And I think you were the youngest lecturer. How old were you when you were a lecturer at the Montfort?
I just went 25 like a few months prior.
Wow.
So people thought I was a student. Like a lot of the other staff were like, oh, where's the lecturer? I'm like, hi. Yeah,
Wow.
so yeah, I think I still hold that record by the time I left as well. I was the youngest lecturer they had ever hired.
Wow, that's amazing. So then coming into now when you came back to Bermuda, so I already kind of touched on it in my introduction just
Yeah.
briefly, because when I first met Dr. Weldon, it was at this the first talk that she had given after when she had come back home. So she was one of the few scientists, especially Black scientists, that I had ever met that was actually doing genetics and then telling us about it. Because in Bermuda, we have a bit of a brain drain. So if you're in Bermuda and you're not in the business, finance, medical field, if you do anything else, it's really hard to find a mentor that's already kind of successful and working on things. So I was really appreciative of Dr. Weldon when she first came back, because she was the first one that I saw that was actually doing it and doing it big, not just being like, hey guys, and then disappearing. But she came back constantly with her PhD students, and she gave us workshops at high schools for the mini PCR machines. And then I can tell you all about the struggle that we were going through together for my test throughout the 8 study. Me in the living room being like, how does this work? She's like going through it again with me. So I wanted to talk to you about just looking at that advice that you have in terms of approach to mentorship, and then also just advising to young Bermudian students. So how do you recommend that they get that mentorship? So how do you continue giving back in that way?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd say the first thing I would recommend is to just go for it. Ultimately, you're not going to know unless you ask. And my driven, or the reason I was so driven to be so seen and visible, which I'm glad it came across that way, is because I didn't have any mentor that looked like me. So throughout my whole career, like I couldn't say, oh, have seen this Black, even female doctor that's doing this. Like I didn't see one, and I really felt very strongly that I had to be that person for the next generation. So I consciously made sure I was visible for that reason. And not everyone is going to be the same, so I'll say that, but you just never know unless you ask. So for example, I get requests from students now, even just want to speak to me. So I make time, even if it's 30 minutes of my day, speak to them to give them advice on, this is my journey and this is what you can do. Sometimes we have students that want to come and see the lab and kind of just get a feel for it. So I try as best as I can, but go for it. You just ask, because the worst you're going to get is a no. And if you get a no, that's fine. You just know not to go to that person, but then try someone else. So that would be my biggest advice. And the other thing would be to stick with what you're passionate about. Because one of the things that when I left out the story was when I was applying for scholarships initially to go to do my undergraduate and even to do my PhD, a question I kept getting was, what are you going to do with that in Bermuda? And I was like, I don't know, but I like it. It was like, But boy, did I show the country what I could do there, right? Got flown back during a global pandemic, and I'm the person to save the day as it was portrayed, and just run everything. And, I was actually reminiscing about this yesterday. Like I was 29, and that might sound old to those who are 10 to 17 right now, but it's not that old to be like making government level or national level, countrywide level decisions. And I was in a position where I was directly advising the premier, and he was doing what I told him. It's like I was the person he went to at 29. That presented some issues for those who felt I was too young to be doing that, and we got past that. But yeah, it's just I wouldn't have been in that position had I not followed my passion. So find what your passion is by trying different things, and then once you find it, just stay on that course and try to get someone to help you. If someone says no, then someone's going to eventually say yes.
We're going to take just a quick break. Well, we get some technical difficulties out of the way.
Yeah. So, unexpected, my laptop is about to die, so that's on my fault. I didn't charge it last night. So I'll be a few minutes. I'll be right back when I just get my charger.
In the meantime, I will be reminding everybody of the gift bag. So we have the the $100 gift card from Digicel, which is ready for you guys. So this is for Bermudian students. We're looking at getting to students that are about 10 to 17. So if you're based in Bermuda and you're in those age range, then you can apply for the gift bag. A wonderful neon bag just here ready for you. And we also have, one moment, the t-shirt. So we have the LinkUp t-shirt where you get the logo on the front and also the back. Just ready for you guys. And also a little Arduino as well. So yep, so as we're waiting for Dr. Weldon, I'll just go back again to kind of explain what we're doing here at the LinkUp for today. So the main goal of the LinkUp is to see it is to be it. So when I was growing up trying to get into STEM and everything, Dr. Weldon was the first person that I met. So I was able to see her being successful in genetics and science, and then know that that was something that I could do as well. I didn't end up pursuing genetics, but it was good to have an example of somebody it was good to have an example of someone that was in the field, but also coming back to give experience and to show us students what was available. That was just amazing to me. And I wanted people to do something similar. So that's why I started the Link Up, to kind of bring you all those different women that I've been meeting, and also some of the men as well, that can help you on your path and really just kind of give you a an insight, really, just an exposure. Exposure is a really big thing. So to see it is to be it. We wanted to show you different people that are successful so that you know that you can do it too and that it is possible. And I'm going to keep going by telling you guys a little bit more about some of the panels that we have later while we wait for Dr. Weldon to come back. So I think the next one is actually most likely going to be, oh my goodness, it's that panel. So we're going to have after this at 12:30 p.m. Bermuda time, or if you're based in London, it'll be at 4:30 p.m. We have The Diary of a Girl Boss. So you're probably wondering, what is that panel and why am I listening to it? Well, if you're in STEM and you're a woman in STEM, you probably have a lot of different things that you want to get into. So for example, I myself am into genetics, I'm into robotics, I'm into biomedical engineering, surgery, medicine, AI. It's a lot of different things, but I've also gained little experiences in all of those things. But it can be a lot to juggle. So I wanted to show you guys some examples of other girls that are also facing this challenge of being, I guess, just involved in a lot of different STEM things and wanting to, be ambitious, especially at a young age. And Dr. Weldon can certainly attest to this with her being the youngest lecturer at De Montfort and then, guiding the Bermudian government during the COVID pandemic at 29. Like that's impressive. So just looking at how, as a young person, you can navigate all of the different interests that you have and wanting to get involved. That won't be at 12:30 p.m. Bermuda time. So you have Balvinder coming to speak, you have Divana, and then you also have Sophie. So we'll talk more about that after this. So Dr. Weldon is back. Great. Oh, and you have the replays, guys, as well. If you missed out on any sessions, you can watch the replay. Alrighty. So we were just finishing off talking about, this is for you, Dr. Weldon. We were just finishing speaking about how you were able to come back to the island, as the hero, like you said. Like people were asking, what were you supposed to do if all of this like biomedical like research? Like what's the point of all of this?
Yeah.
And I get asked that question as well now in my own scholarship interview, so I can relate when I tell them I want to be a surgeon in robotics. They're like, what's the point of that? We don't need that. But that's the point.
Right.
Like we don't have it and we need it. So
You need it, exactly. And it's interesting because again, to like if you're looking for something you already think you need now versus what you're gonna need in the next 7 to 10 years, then we're never gonna innovate. We're never gonna be ahead of the curve. We're never gonna be at the front line of what's going on. So this is why it's important for, I'm going to say us, because I think technically with the UN designation, I'm still a young person. I'm under 35 still, but that's why it's important for us as young people to go with your passion and do something that is never done, because that is how you stand out, and that is how you actually help the country to innovate and be innovative, right? If we're all doing the same thing, then then that's a bit boring, right? So I found sometimes, especially in Bermuda, like you said earlier, you either do law or you do finance. And when you do anything outside of that, like, ooh, what's that? But there are so many different careers in science, for example, that you can do. What I do is one aspect of it, but and this is why I'm excited to have Carry Genetics, because we actually touch on all these other areas. I'm what I call a wet lab scientist. So I can take a sample and generate data, right? But that data, for example, genetics, each individual person has at least 3 billion data points in terms of their genome. That's a lot of data. And we did, for example, our breast cancer study where we sequenced 102 women with the whole genome. So that's 3 billion times 102. That's a lot of data points, right? You need people who can actually do what's called bioinformatics. That's computer science and applying it to genetic information or biological information. That's a whole area of science that is above my head. I kind of know how to do a little bit of it, but it's very viable. But I mean, in Bermuda, I didn't even know that my job existed when I came up. So that's also why I'm very passionate about talking about being seen, about pushing this message, because it's only when you expose, that people will then see. So I'm excited for where we're going. And to what you were saying, I heard you when I just came back with my charger. So yeah, sometimes you will be the youngest in the room, but that doesn't mean you're any less capable, right? Um, when I came, I was the only person that knew how to do it, and got it done. But it didn't really matter how old I was. It was because I had the knowledge, and that is something just to keep in mind. That don't let age become a factor why you may or may not do something. Yeah.
Definitely. I just want to bring it back again. So even in some of the interviews that I had done in terms of the scholarships, when I was
Mm,
telling different people about, I want to be a virologist, or even now when I say I want to do surgery and robotics, and then they immediately, it's kind of like why do you want to do that? So I do
yeah,
want to kind of just emphasize on that point, especially for any Bermudian students that might be listening. You will have people that will come and kind of, knock you to the side a little bit with their questions to be like, why are you doing that? And then you're like, well, why am I doing it? But it's important to have the confidence to come back and explain it, or even if it's just like because I want to, but that's still valid.
that
When even if you have like a really good confident plan, then the confidence will push you through. And I think that's really important to highlight as well. So
and
I'm
the other
gonna
thing as well is
sorry.
that, yes, it's good to come back home and work, but there's a whole big world out there, right? If there's a degree in whatever you're doing, guaranteed there's jobs outside of Bermuda that you can do it as well, and you can get that experience and then come back. So yeah, if someone questions, yeah, just say it's my passion and I want to explore it, and I'm like excited to learn more, and that's it.
So, I do want to I'm going to have to ask it to be relatively brief because I know that this was a bit of a hectic time. But when you were coming back home to Bermuda to help us out with the COVID and everything that had happened, like you mentioned, I know you don't like the word hero, but you were the science advisor 100% to the premier, to Bermuda. You were in the health department, thank you. That's all giving me some pointers. But giving them that you're basically like the face of science really in
Yeah.
Bermuda, like giving us the information that we needed because nobody had it. And I have to go back to some of the interviews that I had, but when I was talking about virology as something that I wanted to study, they're like, oh, we don't need that. And then 2 years later, COVID.
Yeah.
So I think that, it's just the students like ourselves that are, thinking outside the box or thinking more futuristically with these different kinds of, I guess, industries and fields. That's also
Mm,
why, at the link up as well, just seeing it is to be it because, you want to see people that are in the fields that you're thinking of that seem a bit more futuristic or a bit like if you tell somebody about it, they'll be like, what is that? You don't need to do that. But then a few
right.
weeks later, they're like, oh, we need somebody in this field, this little niche thing. So if you could go into, I guess, your experience coming back home, with the accolades that you have, you're a university researcher at Oxford, the youngest lecturer for De Montfort. Can you talk about that experience when you came back home to help us with the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, I'm glad you said to keep it brief because I could talk about that all day. It was, I mean, I had confidence in myself because PCR was something I did almost like every week, like, and I had done for like 10 years leading up to that point. So doing PCR I wasn't worried about, but it was challenging to more so counteract the questions, like that was questioning if I knew what I was doing. I actually was asked the Saturday before I came, do you even know how to do the test? And I was just like, I wouldn't be coming if I didn't know how to do the test. That was what I walked into. Um, the actual execution, and I actually trained a lot of Bermudians as well who were doing science or did a science degree, but came back home and didn't find a science job. So they were working in the bank, they were working in a hair salon, they were working like all over the place. I was able to kind of bring them back to science. So that was like really, really fulfilling. But a lot of what wasn't seen in the background was a lot of issues I was dealing with, more so because I had that direct, kind of authority and I guess power, as it were, to make things happen. So just raising that because as you said, there will be opposition, not just to like, well, why are you doing that? But if you start doing well, like, well, oh, maybe you shouldn't be doing that because they're not able to do it. So just keep pushing. It was really about I had to keep reminding myself, I'm here to help the people of Bermuda. That's it. Global crisis. I know what I'm doing, and that's it. As you probably can pick up, you definitely know I'm really I can stand in front of a bunch of people I've never seen and just be comfortable talking. That's just a gift that God's given me. And so being in front of the camera and, explaining to the public what was going on, I really loved doing that. And it was received really well. And I was told, the public felt at ease knowing I was here. And just hearing that was really, really warming as well. And that drove me to keep going as well. But it was hectic. I mean, we had a lot of stuff to do. We had to open up the airport, being a tourist destination. And I had to be innovative in how we did that. I said, well, maybe we just test everyone 4 times. If people have COVID, we're going to pick it up in this, over time. Let's just not test them once. Let's test them on day 4, day 8, day 14. And initially, when I said that, they were like, that's crazy. I was like, it is, but we would then know. And we opened the airport. I think we were one of the first Caribbean islands to open our airport July 1st. And we kept it safe, and visitors felt safe being here. So yeah, it was definitely a interesting time. But again, the other thing that allowed me to what I got from it was I really gained a lot of confidence in myself. Because at the beginning, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And I was just like, why does he keep asking me questions, the premier? I'm like, I don't know. But as it went and things were working, I was like, okay, I kind of do know what I'm doing. So this is great. And I kind of leaned into it a bit more. So it was an interesting time in my life. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it was about just being innovative, being able to move on the fly, and being able to communicate with the public on what was going on and be transparent. Yeah.
Fascinating. So I'm going to transition from that into now, the wonderful, confident woman that you are now, with your science background, as the sole, I'm going to say this again, I'm going to keep saying it all the time. You are the first woman to solely own a genomics company in the world. Like, this has never been done before. You are the first, you're a trailblazer. And I just find that personally amazing and feeling pretty good to be able to call you my mentor. And it's like, this is pretty cool. So I wanted to kind of go into what inspired you to launch Kari Genetics, and then also why is it so important to have something like Kari Genetics? Because I feel like most of the time, if you say, "Oh, we need a genetics company," then they're like, "What for?" So instead,
Right.
like Ancestry, like, why do we have Ancestry? What do we need that for? So if you
Yeah.
could explain why you launched it, and then also why it's so important to have it here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really came out of, again, seeing that when we have, for example, COVID, where you have the different strains, if you remember that, each different strain of the virus, we'd have to sequence to know we had a new strain. And we weren't able to do it. I knew how to do sequencing, right? And that's what I was doing in Oxford. But we didn't have the capacity to do it in Bermuda. It was driving me nuts. But it wasn't just Bermuda, it was throughout the entire Caribbean. And it was at one point where there was one researcher in Trinidad that had been advocating for years to get a little sequencing machine, the same one that I had. She finally got one, I want to say like summer of 2020. And then she was, for a period of time, the sequencer of all of the samples in the Caribbean. So anytime a sample needed to be sequenced, like, it was going to her one lab. Crazy for 44 million people. That is absolutely crazy. So that's many people in the Caribbean. So we just didn't have the capacity, and it was really clear that we were like so far behind. I think when I looked at the global trends, like, of all the other regions, we were the least prepared for the pandemic. So that was one thing. The other big thing was when the vaccine came out. It's an RNA vaccine. Again, being an RNA scientist, so I was, again, the face of that as well. And speaking to people, they were like, it hasn't been tested on us. I don't feel comfortable. And I was just like, I know, but nothing has been tested on us. Like, all the other drugs you have also haven't been tested on us. Not to invalidate the vaccine, concern, but it really highlighted to the general public, like, actually, medicine isn't what you think. We have been left out of the conversation, and the sheer concern in people's eyes, like, oh my goodness, what do you mean? It was very clear to me that I needed to do something on a Caribbean wide scale, but making sure that we, generated this data. And I just felt like everything leading up to that point had prepared me for this. I was working in the Genome Center at Oxford, so I'd seen how to run a genome lab. I had now been, obviously with COVID, in charge of doing these, government level things, and seeing, from that perspective, how things get done. So everything just felt like, we need to do this. Now, initially, did I have it as a company? No. I was very much like, this has to be a research center, it needs to be nonprofit, because that's what I'm used to as an academic, right? And I have one of my advisors in Bermuda who's like a well-known businessman. He was just like, this needs to be a company, because you're not going to get the donations you want, and you want to be able to get funding. And I was like, It's like, okay. And then I went away, and then 5 months later, as I was building it out, and I was like, yeah, you're right. It'll be a company. So it's like, I told you that before. So it's been, a learning curve. I'm trying to be transitioning over to business, but the reception has been overwhelming. I mean, we initially spent last year just doing the breast cancer study and getting that off the ground in Bermuda as a proof of concept, just to show what we can do. And that was really important to just show execution, because a lot of people can talk, but less people can do it. And so that was really important for us. But now this year, we're able to say, this is what we've done. We can expand, we can do more. And we're now talking to different ministries of health throughout the Caribbean and different regional partners. And everyone's like, where have you been the last few years? And like, been in Bermuda. They're like, we need to be doing this years ago. Like, we're so excited that you're here, and really hitting home the message that we need to do it ourselves in the region, that we are capable, because there's this very real residual, almost like doubt in ourselves that, oh, this is new, we should just not try it. We've been sending samples away for years. Let's just keep doing that. It's like, no, we just showed ourselves through COVID that that wasn't the best way. We can do this ourselves. We can get trained and have that local capacity. And that's really resonating with everyone that we're kind of working with. So yeah, that's why I'm doing this, and just seeing the momentum as we go, and the enthusiasm of wanting to have this in the region, for the Caribbean, by the Caribbean, in the Caribbean, is driving us even further.
Wow. I just want to do a quick reminder before I ask my next question to the attendees that if you have any questions at all, you can feel free to ask them in the Q&A session, or if you want to ask Dr. Weldon the question directly or kind of meet her a little bit, you can feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you. You can meet her. But in the meantime, I do have a follow-up question about, because I remember when we had first done the TAS 38 study, there was a bit of, I do want to say, distrust definitely amongst the island, especially among the men. Because, if you, especially with the wording, because you come to me and you're like, I want to do genetics research with you. You're like, no.
Yeah.
But if you say, I wanted to look at diabetes, or I want to look at it from a taste perspective, then it's a bit different. So I wanted to ask, if do you think that your time as like working with the COVID pandemic in Bermuda, do you think that that helped you gain more trust in the community as well?
100%. It's and that's probably the biggest part that I still haven't grappled with. Like, I cannot go out in public and not be recognized, or someone saying, "Hey, Dr. Warren, hi," or like, "Hey," and so, I mean, to the point now, people are like, "Hey, Carika," and I'm like, "Hey," and they're like, "You don't know me, I just saw you on TV." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." People feel very comfortable with me, and that trust is very much, a burden at times. I feel, because I have to make sure what I'm saying is accurate, right? It's a responsibility now, but it definitely translates into, now when we're doing studies, people trust a bit more because they know that I can execute and know what I'm talking about, right? And that's where, a silver lining from the pandemic was that that's what was an outcome for me. If I hadn't gone through that, not that it wouldn't have been possible, but it would have been a little bit more effort to gain public trust. Right now, I kind of have a full bank of trust from Bermuda, which I'm very, humbly grateful for.
And then to take it back into what you're working on now. So in Bermuda, for those who don't know, if you're not Bermudian, you may not have heard this saying yet, but one of the things that you get asked whenever you meet somebody for the first time is, who's your people? So just like, who do you know? Who do I know that you know? Like, who's in your family? Try to get to know you a little bit, because we're quite a small island. So it's really important for us to know who each other are. And I think that's one of the personal things I love about Bermuda, is that we're so close as an island. It's quite lovely. So I wanted to ask, so with your research, you've looked into the breast cancer study, which is your first one, and then you went into prostate cancer, and now, actually, I'll stick with those two for now. So just looking at how important it is to know ourselves more, like from a healthcare perspective. So if you could talk more about why it was so important for you to look into these ones, like these specific studies of the breast cancer and the prostate cancer. Why did you pick those ones first? And then how can people use the research that you've done to understand more about themselves and their own heritage?
Yeah, I mean, so my research was always in cancer. Sorry, so I am a cancer researcher by trade when I did my PhD, and it also runs in my family. So it was always going to be cancer was going to be the first kind of topic that I focused on. As far as the one that has the most impact on the community, breast cancer is the most diagnosed women's cancer. And prostate is the most men's diagnosed cancer, right? And if you're talking about even mortality, they are also the highest, and not just in Bermuda, but also in the Caribbean. We are the region for breast cancer. It's 4 of the top 10 countries dying from breast cancer are Caribbean countries, and the top spot is Caribbean. It's actually Barbados. And then for prostate, it's actually 7 of the top 10 countries that are dying from prostate cancer in the world are Caribbean islands. We're like, in terms of the rates, we're top 7 of the top 10. So it just made so much sense to focus there. And obviously you have breast, which is female mainly focused, and prostate, which is male, so we can make sure we cover everyone in the community and not just one of the genders. And yeah, I mean, it went really well. The key reason why we wanted to do these studies is because all of the tests, when you want to see what your risk of breast cancer is, and some of the listening audience may remember or may not, but someone like Angelina Jolie, for example, she found out that her genetics meant she had a really high risk of getting breast cancer, and then she got, like both of them taken off. So that type of information actually is based off of European studies. None of them have been done on non-European people. So the test that we use to say, oh, let's screen you to see what's your risk of breast cancer, the genes that we're looking at are all been from European studies. And with the Caribbean being so prominent for deaths in both of those diseases, it was like, well, maybe there's a unique genetic mutation or variant that is in our population that we're missing, because clearly, we're not, something's going wrong here. And so that was what kind of drove the breast cancer study, and now we're recruiting for prostate cancer, and the results spoke to that. So usually you maybe, probably this audience may be aware, but when you talk about breast cancer genes, BRCA1 and BRCA2 are the main ones that come up. In most population studies that have been done, they're the majority of the genes that are causing inherited breast cancer. We are the first country to report that it isn't. Minority, so it was like 40% of the genes that were causing women to have breast cancer is as in like from birth or being inherited with this risk were not BRCA1 and BRCA2. There were other genes. And so that in and of itself just shows that we're unique, we're different, and we need to explore this further. And that's now led to us as a company having conversations with pharma companies. And, we're now pursuing that angle in terms of doing a bigger screening throughout the Caribbean and expanding the studies. So yeah, it's definitely driven by need. And when we're speaking to governments and different partners, everyone's like, yes, we need to know this data. So it's definitely a needed thing.
We do actually have a question, so I'm going to pause on my ones and head over to this one. So we have a question from Shay. So he says, hi, Dr. Weldon. It's been an honor and a pleasure to hear you talk today. My question would be that what were the challenges that you faced when you created the company from your research?
Oh my goodness, so many. Still going through. So we're still young. We're a year and a half into being a company. Well, the first one was we need to raise money, right? So sequencing and genetics is expensive. Luckily, again, because of that public trust, I think, and because I just finished dealing with COVID, we were able to raise money initially when we got going, but that wasn't a infinite pot of money. It had an end date. And one of the challenges is we're not the UK, we're not the US, we don't have NIH or like the Wellcome Trust or big research foundations and grants that we can apply to. And it's not a government line item. So like Genomics England, which is the big initiative in the UK, they were funded fully by government. Government put in millions of dollars to get that off the ground, and they had funding from other, partners. But we don't have that. So we're at a point now where we're kind of starting to have these conversations, but we have to be a bit creative of how we get our funding, and how we get things going. So that was one challenge. The next challenge I had was, as I was speaking to people, they was like, "Are you the first person to think of this?" And I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know what everyone's thinking, but I am definitely the first person to do it and get it off the ground. And so, just again, being confident that I'm owning this is mine. So that's something that used to come up. I think I've convinced enough people now. So we are now seen as like the genetics experts in the Caribbean. So that's good. So that's paid off. And then one of the other challenges is running a company in a place where mostly everyone knows everyone. You tend to, hire people that you know. And sometimes that can run into challenges because people get too comfortable and they, it's a startup. We have to be, working really hard. And so initially finding the right people was a little bit of a challenge. And this is a very different type of company. That this is not your normal like insurance, reinsurance company. So everything we're doing is new, even on the legal side. How we raise money was the first time it was raised that way in Bermuda. All the legalities of what we're doing, the data protection, the sequencing, like, everything is very new. Even the tests that we offer, so we offer at-home tests. No one's done that before in Bermuda or the Caribbean. So we're hitting a lot of first, and it's a good thing, but it's also a challenge because then, we're kind of breaking ground and we're not sure what comes next. So yeah, I would say those are the challenges, but we're getting through them and overcoming them, and excitingly so, and we're pushing forward.
And then because you touched on it, I'm going to just jump on that opportunity and talk a little bit more about the ancestry kit that you have developed. So if you wouldn't mind, this is the first one, never been done before the Caribbean. There's just a lot of firsts around card genetics. That's just
A lot of firsts.
the nature of it. So if you could explain why it was so important for you to have one, and because there's so many different ones on the market right now. So why did we need one specifically for the Caribbean? And then also, if you could explain a little bit more about what it actually is as well.
Yeah. So actually when we launched the company back in like late 2022, the first thing that people kept asking was like, are you going to do an ancestry test? So I was like, wasn't planning to, but okay. And it just kept coming. It was between that and paternity test. So like, can you do a paternity test that's more affordable? I was like, okay. So I always had that kind of in the back of my mind. So for the ancestry, it's actually really important in the biggest scheme of what we're doing, because ancestry and health are directly related, right? Your genes that you have inherited that impact your health is because of who your ancestors were. So actually understanding your ancestry is really important in the bigger scheme of understanding your health risk. And so from that perspective, we were like, okay, this fits. Now, in terms of creating one that's more tailored to the Caribbean, again, those ancestry tests, I mean, the big ones like 23andMe, Ancestry.com, they had already publicly announced that they were Eurocentric. So they had already said, you know what, we're not diverse. They already had said that. So they kind of opened up the door for us to be like, okay, well, we can come in and be the diverse option. So that happened. And that was actually as a result of 2020, when you had Floyd, what was the gentleman's name? It's escaping.
No.
Yeah. The gentleman that was unfortunately killed by the police. So from that, they, everyone became, focused on diversity at that point, and they were called out on the fact that they were not diverse, and they responded that way. The difference as well with the Caribbean is we've got so many different ethnicities that are in the Caribbean, right? So we've got obviously a very heavy African ancestry, but then we've got a lot of Indian. So you've got Indo-Caribbeans. We've got those from obviously Europe as well. We've got some Latin, so you have Spanish-speaking Caribbean. So there's a heavy Latin American ancestry as well. And then you've got like these other interesting ones. Like we've got a high Jewish population, which is partly why BRCA1 and BRCA2 is there as well. We've got Indonesian, we've got Chinese, like we've got everyone in one place. And most of the studies, or the databases, should I say, that are used for ancestry cover most of those, but they tend to leave out or have a lower resolution of African and Latin American and indigenous people. So we said, well, if we're gonna make a Caribbean focused product, we need to make sure we like cover those a little bit more. So we found a really great partner that was already working on the Latin American side, and we were able to then pull in some other databases that have a higher African resolution. And so that's where we're starting. By no means is it perfect. As we get more people from the Caribbean doing it, we can gather more data and then refine it. So that's the goal, to have the first Caribbean ancestry resolution database that then we can use for, for doing a more accurate ancestry. But that was why we did it. It was asked for by the community. And again, we want to be seen as your, like, not that we're trying to be like Spider-Man, but you're a friendly community scientist, right? And that we have to, because again, it's very sensitive information, and there has to be a dialogue between us and the public, and that they hear, that we listen, and that we respond. So that was important. But then also on the business side, taking off to the science hat, we have to make money. So that was now a viable way to make revenue as an early company. And then we extended beyond ancestry into health and wellness. So we have a fitness DNA test, a nutrition DNA test, a skincare DNA test, a personality DNA test. And then we have paternity, as we were asked, and a family relationship test that we actually have used recently by a lawyer in one of the islands for a land dispute, because someone was trying to inherit some land and saying they're related to this family. So they now using our test to figure that out. So there's definitely a need, and it allows us to also, again, make money as a young company, but again, have that dialogue and relationship with the community.
Wow. I'm happy to say we have another question.
Yeah.
So this one is from Balvinder. So if you guys are coming to the Girl Boss panel, you can also speak with her there. But Dr. Bell would like to say, hi, Dr. Weldon. You've done so much academically, and it is very inspiring. I just have two questions. So the first one is, did you suffer from any burnout at any stage of your career? And if yes, how did you manage to push through? And then number two, how did you recover from the disappointments that you've had academically? Thank you.
Nice question. Yes, 100% to burnout. There was a point when I was in England and I was doing my PhD, because I'm from Bermuda, right? We're from an island. It's nice and sunny. England was cold and it was like snowing and stuff. I did not go outside for a month. I kept telling my PhD supervisor I was sick. I was like, oh, I'm sick. I can't come here. I had lost all like will to go in and do any research. I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And it only got to the point where he was like, my PhD supervisor said, oh, we're gonna have to ask for like an extension, which was like a whole big process. And I was like, no, I'm coming in. So, I had to kind of wake myself up out of it, but definitely had a mental burnout there. And then during COVID, that was a whole next level, because I didn't have anyone to deputize me. So there was no one that could take over if I was sick. Like, so, I mean, there was a point even where, as far as like DNA extraction from samples, I was the only person able to do that. As I was training students, they weren't quite ready to do it. But there was a period where like a month I had to be in work every single day doing the extractions because no one else was able to crack it. And so, yeah, definitely got burned out. I worked every single day for a year and a half straight. I didn't have any weekends off. I didn't have any vacation, because it was like you just had to, right? From April 2020 to September 2021, I worked every day. And I had like 3 weeks off at that point, which didn't feel like much. So I definitely had burnout. But I think, and even now in running my company, I work every day pretty much. I try to have a bit more of a balance now, where I take like the evenings off or weekends. But there's so much to be done, and being a young company, you don't have like a super big team. So sometimes I do have burnout, but what I try to do is, or what I did in the past was look at the big picture. Where am I going? It's not a sprint either. It's a marathon that you're on when you're doing any type of research. And so sometimes I had to say to myself, it's okay if you don't work on this today. You have tomorrow. Not everything has to be done today, right? When it comes to research, and being okay with that. Because sometimes in the lab, I would like planning, my day when I was doing my PhD, like, okay, I started at 10, I'm going to finish at 10. Like, that's not sustainable. So it's okay to have rest, and breaks are a part of the whole strategy of accomplishing something. So that's how I kind of dealt with that. And now I just more strict with myself and say, you know what, I'm closing the laptop. I'm gonna watch Game of Thrones. That's what I'm currently watching right now. I'm gonna watch TV and I'm gonna not think about any of this because yeah, you have to have that balance. And I play tennis. I'm trying to get actually back into that now, but making sure you're playing a sport and getting out and having that balance is so important because sometimes it feels like, oh, I gotta do this now, but in reality, we have time, especially if you're doing a PhD. Like you got 4 years. So okay, if you sleep tonight and don't do it, it's okay, and accepting that's okay because I think we are in a generation where we kind of are fed that you have to be a hustler, you have to be like always working, and like it's glorified to always be doing something, but no, that's not healthy. So yeah.
Um, um, just for that last, we just had one more extra question that I'm going to ask you to keep it semi-brief because I just have one more question, then we'll be done. But
Yeah.
just for the second part of her question was, how did you recover from the disappointments that you've had academically?
Support system was a big one. So my parents had to be like, it's okay. We're not disappointed. Because I was disappointed myself because I thought I had let everyone else down. So having the support system around me with my parents and like school teachers being able to say, no, you've done a great job. That was super, super, super important. And when it came to, trying to get into medicine, again, it was having those mentors that were able to tell me there's another way. This is not the end of the road. Like, I love singing karaoke as well. It's another one of my passions. So I sing End of the Road, Boys to Men a lot, but it wasn't the end of the road. This is not it. There's another way that you can pivot and it's just a detour. It's not the end of your journey. So that's how I got past it. And that's what I kind of say to young people is if you feel like you're going a different direction, don't feel like it's the end of the road. It might just be a detour. It might be better in the long run. So just lean into that and enjoy it, experience as it's coming.
And I think just as my final question, because we're wrapping up, we're kind of over time, but I hope you guys don't mind staying a tiny bit longer for the answer to this question. Just because I've been noticing a bit of a pattern when speaking to or just listening to women of color when they're in these successful positions, especially when you're by yourself, really, because most of the time we're kind of forging ahead on our own, but being a bit of a superwoman. I've definitely been seeing that when just, growing up and watching my own mom, growing up and watching her do all of her entrepreneur things by herself and just really pushing ahead, definitely that superwoman mentality. So I guess would you say that you've noticed more, I guess, like, is that something that we all seem to struggle with of just kind of like pushing ourselves too hard? And then also I think you already kind of gave a bit of advice, but what advice do you have for, I guess, girls and women of color specifically when it comes to, I guess, overworking ourselves in that way?
It is definitely a trend. It is definitely like seen as a standard that we have to prove our worth by working all the time. And from my other lens of being, on the genetics, health and wellness side, I'm doing research, that stress is actually bad. You're not getting enough rest. Rest is good for the body. If you're not getting enough rest, if you're not decompressing, if you don't have that balance, actually your overall health is being impacted in a bad way. So, it is an issue. And I think even more so for Black women and Black girls, we are, I'll get a quote from Scandal, because I love that show as well. We have to work twice as hard to get half of the respect. That's just how it goes. And I've experienced that in my career as well. There is some racism that I faced in the UK. And it was weird because I hadn't experienced that before because it's really prevalent as much in what I've experienced in Bermuda. But at the same time, it's just knowing, okay, that is their perception, but I need to put me first. And I think the other thing I would say, just as my advice to any and everyone listening, is there's only one of you. There's only one of you. And yes, you may have other people that care about you, but you have to be number one on your list of the person that is putting you first. So that is more important. You will achieve what you want, especially if you're driven and you're ambitious, but you don't want to get there like in pieces, right? You want to finish strong. You want to be healthy so that you can enjoy the fruits of your labor, right? And not be sick. And I think we've seen that with even in Bermuda among some really prominent people in the community that were pushing this and achieve greatness, but they were not doing it in a healthy way. We've seen the outcome, I think, at least in Bermuda, in a few different ways. So go for it, but just make sure that you're taking care of yourself because there's only one of you. You can't replace you.
And that was great advice to finish on. So thank you so much, Dr. Weldon, for your time and for the attendees for staying on the extra 5 minutes. I appreciate you guys. So please come back and join us in 10 minutes. We have a panel called the Diary of a Girl Boss, where I have 3 other girls in STEM that are very ambitious. They're juggling a lot, working on so many different projects, and they're ready to give you guys some advice about how you can balance it all and really kind of just keep everything in check. So we're going to be learning a little bit from them. Thank you so much to Dr. Weldon for your time. I'm so glad to have had you, especially having had you on my journey this whole time. So it's good to be able to bring you in another time. Yes, my mom's showing off her shirt in the background. But yes, we do have shirts. Shirts already in here. Dr. Weldon's already modeling it wonderfully. You can see what you can look forward to if you're a Bermudian student between the ages of 10 to 17. That was great. Thank you so much. I'm going to end that one here.